Two police officers pulled over a black man late at night. There was no justifiable reason, no evidence of a violation, just suspicion in their eyes and words laced with prejudice. But as the cold metal of the handcuffs locked around his wrists, they had no idea they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. What will happen when the truth comes to light? Stay with us until the end to uncover the shocking turn of events in this story. And before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. Comment your city or country below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow we'll bring you another powerful story, just for you. Now let's begin. The crunch of tires against the gravel echoed through the quiet night as Marcus Caldwell, a 48-year-old man known for his composed demeanor and leadership, turned onto Sycamore Avenue. He was heading home after a long but meaningful day, having spent time meeting with community leaders in Charlotte, North Carolina. His simple black sedan blended seamlessly with the peaceful suburban streets. His thoughts briefly wandered to the scent of his wife's signature barbecue waiting for him at home. Then, red and blue lights flared in his rearview mirror, slicing through the night like a warning siren. Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His eyes flicked to the speedometer, 29 in a 35 zone. No speeding, no broken taillights, yet the wail of the siren blared, signaling him to pull over. Stay calm, he reminded himself, flipping on his turn signal and slowly guiding the car to a stop by the curb. He knew the protocol. Keep hands visible, move deliberately, remain respectful. A process he had memorized, not because he had ever done anything wrong, but because in situations like this, first impressions could mean everything. The officer approached briskly, flashlight in hand, its beam cutting through the interior. Another officer lingered near the trunk, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. "Where are you rushing off to?" the first officer asked, suspicion laced in his tone. "No rush, sir," Marcus responded, his voice steady but firm. "I'm just heading home." The light lingered on his face, pausing a beat longer than necessary before sweeping across the dashboard and back to his eyes. "License and registration," the officer ordered, ignoring his response. Marcus slowly reached for the glove compartment, narrating every movement aloud. "I'm retrieving my registration. My license is in my wallet. I'll get it after handing you the registration." The officer said nothing, but his body tensed slightly. "You know why I pulled you over?" His voice carried the tone of someone who had already made up his mind. Before Marcus could respond, the officer continued. "You were swerving, drifting into the other lane." Marcus frowned. "Sir, with all due respect, I wasn't swerving. My dashcam can confirm that." "Dashcam?" The officer's voice sharpened. "That'll be taken as evidence. Step out of the car." Marcus blinked, taken aback by the sudden escalation. "Is there a problem, sir?" "I'm fully cooperating." The officer's jaw tightened. "I said step." A knot of unease coiled in Marcus' stomach, but he complied, unbuckling his seatbelt slowly, opening the door, and raising both hands visibly. The second officer immediately moved in, gripping his arm and yanking him toward the squad car. "Is this necessary?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but laced with steel. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Resisting? Huh?" The first officer smirked. "You really want to play this game? Suit yourself." The cold bite of metal clamped around Marcus' wrists, the handcuffs locking with a sharp click. A wave of disbelief surged through him. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was profiling, plain and simple. The two officers shoved Marcus into the back seat of the patrol car. Through the tinted window, he looked down the street, noticing a few neighbors peeking through their curtains. Their silhouettes pressed against the glass, faintly illuminated by porch lights. No one stepped outside. But this wasn't over. They had no idea they had just arrested the wrong man. And Marcus wasn't planning on staying silent for long. The patrol car rumbled as it pulled away, rolling down the familiar streets. Marcus sat upright, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery, though his mind wasn't registering the streetlights or storefronts flashing by. He was still processing the absurdity of what had just happened. Up front, the two officers talked casually, their voices laced with indifference, as if they hadn't just handcuffed an innocent man. The younger officer, Daniels, glanced into the rearview mirror, his smirk evident even in the dim light. "So, what's your deal? Some junkie making a delivery in the middle of the night? Or do you just enjoy pissing off cops?" Marcus met his gaze in the mirror, his expression steady, unshaken. "I'm just a man trying to get home." "Yeah, sure." The other officer, Reed, a broad-shouldered man with a cocky demeanor, let out a scoff. "Every reckless driver's got a story." Marcus pressed his lips together, reining in the anger tightening in his chest. Arguing wouldn't help. He inhaled deeply, mentally sorting through his options. He knew his rights, but he also knew how this system worked, and right now the odds weren't in his favor. By the time they reached the station, the harsh glow of fluorescent lights cast an eerie pallor over the holding area. Parker unlatched the handcuffs with a deliberately slow motion, smirking as if enjoying the moment. "Welcome to your new home. You'll be here for a while." "What exactly am I being charged with?" Marcus asked evenly, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had dug into his skin. Sullivan smirked. "We'll let you know when we figure it out. Now sit tight." They led Marcus into a small, sterile holding cell. The heavy metal door clanged shut behind him, the sound reverberating through the empty space. He lowered himself onto the cold wooden bench, his mind churning with the weight of what had just happened. He had spent his entire life building a career on justice and fairness. And now, he was the victim of the very abuse of power he had fought so hard to eliminate. Outside the cell, Parker and Sullivan leaned against a desk, casually flipping through Marcus' paperwork, their conversation laced with mockery. "Nothing suspicious," Parker muttered, a hint of disappointment in his voice. "No worries," Sullivan smirked. "Guys like him always have skeletons in their closet." Marcus heard every word, but his expression remained impassive. He sat still, fingers interlaced, posture unwavering. He wasn't angry, he was calculating, and he knew his patience would soon pay off. Time crawled. Other officers passed by, occasionally glancing at him with vague curiosity. None of them recognized him, but Marcus wasn't expecting them to. He was new here, and this was only the beginning. It had been just 3 weeks since he had taken on this position. Finally, as dawn began to streak the sky with shades of amber, Marcus heard the steady approach of footsteps. A sharp-looking officer appeared before the bars, exuding an air of authority that immediately set her apart from the others. Her badge read, Lieutenant Morgan. She carried herself with professionalism and control, a stark contrast to the 2 officers from the night before. Harper frowned, her eyes flicking from Marcus to the file in her hands. "What exactly is going on here?" Parker stepped forward. "We brought him in last night for reckless driving and resisting arrest." Harper raised an eyebrow. "Reckless driving? Where's the evidence?" Sullivan, still leaning lazily against the desk, shrugged. "We haven't processed it yet." Harper turned to Marcus. "Sir, do you know why you were pulled over?" Marcus stood, his gaze steady as he met hers. "I was told it was for reckless driving. I categorically deny that accusation. I also have dashcam footage that will prove it." Harper exhaled sharply, her sharp eyes cutting back to the 2 officers. "You didn't check his dashcam footage?" Sullivan shrugged again. "Haven't gotten around to it." A flicker of irritation crossed Harper's face. "Check it. Now." She turned to Daniels. "And you, my office. Now." The 2 officers hesitated but eventually moved, their bravado noticeably diminished. Marcus knew the tide was beginning to turn, but this was just the start. The cold metal of the bench pressed into Marcus' back as he sat in the holding cell, silently observing as the station came to life with the morning shift. Time moved slowly, broken only by the shuffle of paperwork and distant murmurs of conversation. On the surface, everything seemed routine, but Marcus' mind was anything but still. He replayed every moment from the night before like a film reel in slow motion, each sharp word, each unnecessary escalation. It was all proof of what he had spent years fighting against. Becoming the new police chief had been his chance to reform the system from within to foster a culture of accountability. And now, before he had even settled into his office, he had become its latest victim. And now, he was the victim of the very abuse of power he had sworn to eliminate. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, pulling him back to the present. Harper returned, a tablet in hand. She gestured for Marcus to step closer to the bars. We reviewed the dashcam footage. Her voice was crisp, professional, but edged with something colder, something resolute. I also spoke with the 2 officers who arrested you. Let me be clear, this should never have happened. Marcus raised an eyebrow, unsurprised, but he waited for her to continue. The footage completely contradicts their report. She set the tablet down on the desk, her gaze hardening. I'm releasing you immediately. She paused for a brief moment before adding, but I'd like to discuss the next steps with you. Privately. Minutes later, Marcus stepped out of the holding cell and into Harper's office, now seated across from her. The room was utilitarian. Just a desk, a few chairs, and a modest filing cabinet. No decorations, no unnecessary embellishments, just business. Harper placed a file folder on the desk. I'll be filing a formal complaint against Parker and Reed. Her fingers interlaced on the tabletop as she studied him carefully. There's something I want to ask. She hesitated, clearly weighing her words. Who are you, really? You're far too composed for a man who just spent the night in a holding cell for no reason. Marcus leaned back slightly, a controlled, almost knowing smile playing at his lips. I appreciate your caution, Lieutenant, but let's just say I've been in situations like this before. I've learned that keeping calm is always the best strategy. Harper regarded him for a moment, before nodding. Fair enough, but I have a feeling this isn't over. As Marcus stepped out of the precinct, the early morning sun cast a warm glow across his face, but the weight of the past night still pressed heavily on his shoulders. He didn't go straight home. Instead, he drove to his office, pulling into his designated parking spot before walking through the front doors of the police headquarters, the very institution he was now responsible for leading. From behind the reception desk, Bennett, his assistant, looked up, momentarily startled. Chief Caldwell? You're in early. Marcus nodded, his expression calm but resolute. It was a long night, Bennett. Get the conference room ready. I need to address the entire department this afternoon. Bennett nodded quickly, sensing the weight in his voice. As Marcus stepped into his office and shut the door behind him, he exhaled deeply. He knew what was coming. This wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger, a system deeply ingrained, a culture that had been left unchecked for far too long. The public had placed their trust in him to lead, to protect, to ensure accountability. That responsibility was heavy, but Marcus accepted it. Before he could take action, though, there was another battle ahead. One that would unfold not in the streets, but in the courtroom, where the truth would finally come to light. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread quickly, and local media outlets were eager to cover it. While cameras weren't permitted inside, that didn't stop reporters from crowding the courthouse steps, ready to pounce with questions the moment the hearing concluded. Marcus sat silently at the defense table while his attorney, Lisa Carter, flipped through a thick file of evidence. Lisa was a force to be reckoned with, sharp, relentless, and known for dismantling weak arguments with ruthless precision. Across the room, Parker and Sullivan sat beside a court-appointed attorney. Parker looked uneasy, his foot tapping anxiously against the floor. Sullivan, on the other hand, tried to appear composed, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open. A senior judge, his demeanor stern and no-nonsense, entered and called the session to order. Today, we are here to review the charges against Marcus Caldwell. Prosecution, please present your case. A young prosecutor, appearing somewhat unsure of himself, rose and began to recite the initial report. On the night in question, the defendant was observed driving recklessly, swerving between lanes. When stopped by officers Parker and Reed, he refused to comply and resisted arrest. Lisa barely concealed a smirk. She leaned toward Marcus, whispering, "They're walking right into the trap." When it was her turn, Lisa rose, her voice cutting through the courtroom with authority, commanding attention. Your Honor, not only are these charges baseless, but they are a direct result of racial profiling and abuse of power. To prove this, I will present video evidence that directly contradicts the officer's sworn statements. The judge nodded. Proceed. Lisa signaled to the bailiff. The lights in the courtroom dimmed as the large screen flickered to life. The dashcam footage began to play. The room fell silent. The screen showed it all. Marcus driving steadily in his lane, the speedometer holding at 29 miles per hour. The patrol car appeared in the rearview mirror, its emergency lights flashing without cause. Then, the footage from the officer's body cameras played. The courtroom fell silent as Parker's voice echoed through the speakers. Another troublemaker. Sullivan chuckled in response. Knew it. A murmur rippled through the room. Some gasped. Others turned to each other, stunned. The judge's brow furrowed, his gaze sharpening as it shifted toward the two officers. Lisa paused the video, turning to the jury. This is the professionalism of Officers Parker and Reed. She fast-forwarded. Now let's review the actual arrest. The screen continued to play. Marcus remained composed, announcing each movement as he retrieved his registration and license. The contrast between his calm demeanor and the officer's unnecessary aggression was undeniable. When the video ended, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Lisa looked directly at the jury. This is not just an abuse of power. She let the words hang in the air. This is a blatant violation of my client's rights, fueled by bias and prejudice. The prosecution shifted uncomfortably. The officers believed they had reasonable cause to. Lisa cut in, her voice razor-sharp. Reasonable cause based on what? Driving safely, following instructions, or the color of his skin? The judge tapped his gavel lightly, his voice steady but firm. Let's keep these proceedings in order. Lisa lowered her tone, but every word carried weight. Your Honor, before we proceed, my client would like to say something. Marcus stood, adjusting his tie. His gaze swept across the courtroom, pausing briefly on the two officers before settling on the judge. My name is Marcus Caldwell. His voice was calm, but resolute. I am the chief of police for this city. I was appointed 3 weeks ago to lead this department and address the very issues you have just witnessed. I did not disclose my identity immediately because I wanted the truth to unfold naturally, without bias, without interference. And now the truth is clear. A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Parker's face turned ghostly pale. The arrogance vanished from Sullivan's expression in an instant. The judge pounded the gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Marcus continued, his voice low but commanding. This is not just about me. His eyes locked onto the jury. This is about an entire system that allows this to happen. Officers like Parker and Sullivan have operated unchecked for too long. That ends today. But this moment was more than just an expose. It was a reckoning, a shockwave that would ripple far beyond the four walls of the courtroom. The room was suffocatingly silent as Marcus returned to his seat. His final words still hung in the air, like the echo of a thunderclap. Parker and Sullivan sat frozen, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and fear. The judge called for a recess, allowing everyone time to absorb what had just unfolded. When the proceedings resumed, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The prosecution had nothing left to argue. The judge swiftly dismissed all charges against Marcus. But this was only the beginning. As Marcus stepped outside the courthouse, a swarm of reporters descended, cameras flashing relentlessly, microphones thrust in his direction. Chief Caldwell, do you have any comments on the outcome of this case? One reporter's voice rose above the chaos. Marcus raised a hand, signaling for order. The crowd fell silent, waiting for his response. This case was never just about me. His voice was calm but firm. It's about accountability, about ensuring that every citizen, regardless of who they are, is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. As chief of police, I am committed to building a department rooted in integrity and fairness. As a citizen, I will continue to fight for justice, The questions kept coming, but Marcus didn't stop. He had more important things to do. The fallout from the case was swift. Parker and Sullivan were immediately suspended, pending an internal investigation. Public outrage exploded as the footage went viral. Protests erupted, demanding reform. Community leaders stepped forward, calling for greater transparency and improved police training. Marcus' role as chief now carried an entirely new weight. He called for an emergency meeting, gathering the entire department. Standing before the packed room, his voice was steady and unwavering. What happened to me last night was not an isolated incident. His gaze swept across the room. It is a symptom of a deeper problem. And as long as I am here, I will not tolerate it. We are here to protect and serve, not to harass and intimidate. If any of you cannot uphold that principle, then this is not the place for you. Silence. Not a single voice dared to speak. His words cut through the last remnants of doubt in the room. In the weeks that followed, Marcus spearheaded sweeping reforms. Mandatory training on implicit bias, stronger oversight, an anonymous reporting system for police misconduct. And for the first time in years, real change was beginning to take shape. This was only the beginning. The community had started to see change. Trust could not be restored overnight, but the first steps had been taken. A few months later, Marcus sat in a town hall meeting, listening as a young man stood up to speak. His voice wavered slightly, but his resolve was clear. Chief Caldwell, he began. What happened to you could have happened to me, could happen to any one of us. Thank you for standing up, not just for yourself, but for all of us. Marcus nodded. His heart felt heavy, but it was also filled with hope. Change doesn't happen overnight, Marcus responded, his voice steady. But together, we can build a system that truly serves everyone. As the meeting concluded, people slowly filed out, a newfound sense of hope reflecting in their eyes. Marcus remained for a moment, quietly observing. He knew this fight was far from over, but he was ready for it. And now, the responsibility is ours, those who witness and those within the community. If we see injustice, we must speak up. If we want change, we must demand it. Together, we can create a world where accountability is not just a promise but a reality. This story is a powerful reminder of justice, responsibility, and the power of change. If you were in Marcus' position, how would you have handled this situation? Have you ever had to stand up for what is right, even in the face of injustice? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire and drive positive change. If you found this story meaningful, share it with your friends and family. Let's spread the message of fairness and courage together. Every small action we take can help build a better society. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more powerful stories. See you in the next video where together we create change. Thank you for supporting the channel. Like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared to promote human values and have been rewritten with AI assistance. If there are any errors, we ask for your understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.